This video is going to be about absolute value equations. So let's think about what an absolute value really does. So an absolute value is basically two lines and then you have a number in the inside. Okay, so something that looks like this. Well, an absolute value basically just tells me the distance that you are from zero. That's what an absolute value does. So absolute value, all this tells me is the distance from zero. So if I have a number here 2 and we want to figure out the absolute value, we want to figure out how far is 2 from 0. Well, this is just 2 units. Okay, that is just the answer. What about if I asked for -2? Well, -2 is 2 units also away from 0. Okay, so remember, we're looking at distance. Distance tells me how far I am from 0, and distance should always be positive. That's why every single time the answer is always going to be a positive number. Okay, so now let's say we have some sort of unknown value x. Okay, well, what value of x will give me a 3? Okay, so we got to think about what number should I plug into the absolute value and it'll give me a distance of 3. Well, if x equals 3, well, and I plug in 3, well, I'm going to get the absolute value of 3 is going to give me 3. Now, that's not the only answer. X can also be -3, because when I plug in -3 in there, I'm also going to get a positive 3. So there's actually two solutions to these types of problems. So when you're solving an absolute value equation, you're going to have two solutions, one that's positive and one that's negative. Okay, so if I told you what value of x will give me a 4, well, you will give me two different answers. X equals 4 and x equals -4. Because if I think of 4, here is 0, there's two values that have a distance of 4. We have positive 4 because 4 units this way is 4. And we also have -4 because 4 units this way is also 4. Okay, so when you're talking about absolute value, you always want to set the inside to a positive number and to a negative number. Okay. Now, one thing to really notice right before we jump into some equations, if I have the absolute value of x equal a negative number, well, is this possible? Can I plug in a value of x and get out a negative distance? The answer here is no. So whenever the absolute value is equal to a negative, then there's going to be no solution. Okay, so there's no solution to that. Okay, so we have to be very careful. So what you really want to do is isolate this absolute value to solve the problems. So let's do some examples. So here's my first example. So we want to solve. Let's say we want to have absolute value of x minus 5 is equal to 3. Okay, now this absolute value in the inside is going to have two solutions, one that's a positive 3 and one that's a -3. Okay, just very similar to the same thing that we were doing over here. So you're going to have x minus 5. I'm going to drop the absolute value. This is going to be equal to 3. And I'm also going to have another answer. X minus 5 is equal to -3. Okay, and now we're going to solve it. So we're going to add 5 to both sides. So x is going to be equal to 8. That's one of the solutions. And here, I'm going to add 5. Okay, get rid of it. So x here is going to be equal to 2. So here, x is equal to two different answers. 8 and 2. Okay, so that's how you can write it. Okay, and how do we know if this is correct? Well, let's plug it in. If I put 8 minus 5, that's going to give me 3. Absolute value of 3 is going to give me 3. Plug in 2. 2 minus 5 is going to give me -3. Absolute value of -3 gives me also a 3. Okay, so that checks out. So let's say we wanted to do a problem like this. 2x minus 4 is equal to 10. Okay, so you can go ahead and try it out, or you can just follow me along. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to separate it into two different equations. 2x minus 4 equals 10, one that's positive, and 2x minus 4 equals -10. That's negative. Okay, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. This goes away. 2x is equal to 14. Divide by 2, divide by 2. X is equal to 7. That is one of my answers. My other answer, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So I'm going to have 2x is equal to -6. And then I'm going to divide by 2. So x is equal to -3. Okay, and you can go ahead and check it by plugging it back in there. Okay. All right, so let's do a couple more tricky problems. So let's say I had absolute value of -3/4 x plus 1 is equal to 0. Okay, well, this was pretty straightforward, but we're going to have one that's positive and one that's negative. So we're going to have -3/4 x plus 1 equals positive 0, and -3/4 x plus 1 equals -0. But what's -0? -0, 0 is 0. It's not positive or negative. So this is actually still the same thing as the original problem. So basically this is the same. You don't really need to do anything. You only have one equation. So here you will only have one solution. So when you have this equal to 0, you're only going to have one solution. So it's -3/4 x plus 1 equals 0, minus the 1 to both sides. So -3/4 x equals -1. Okay, now I need to get the 4 out of there, so I'm going to multiply by 4 to both sides. That's going to go away. So I have -3x is equal to -4, and then I'm just going to divide by this -3. Okay, x is equal to a negative and a negative is going to give me a positive 4/3, and that is my answer. Okay, all right, let's do a couple more. So now let's do a tricky problem. Let's say we had absolute value of x plus 3 minus 1 is equal to 4. Okay? Now here we have to be very, very careful because you don't want to separate it as this whole thing equals positive 4 and then -4. What you want to do first, and I'm going to write it in red, solve, or maybe not solve, isolate the absolute value first. Value first. That's the first thing you want to do before you start separating it. So right now what we have, we're going to have absolute value of x plus 3 minus 1 equals 4. So right now it's not by itself. This thing is not by itself. I got to add this 1 first. So that goes away. So I have absolute value of x plus 3 is equal to 5. Now I can separate it because the absolute value is by itself. So this is going to be x plus 3 equals 5. X plus 3 equals -5. I'm going to subtract by 3 to both sides. So x here is equal to 2. And then minus 3 to both sides. X here is equal to -8. Okay, and that is my answer. Okay, you can plug it back in there and you'll see that it's actually the same. Okay, so that was part D. Let's do a part E. Let's do 2 more. Okay, so let's say you want to figure out what 2 absolute value of 3x minus 1 minus 3 is equal to, let's say we want to have 7. Okay. So here is a really good problem. Make sure that you star this because something like this will be on the exam. Okay. So the first thing that you want to do is that the absolute value is not by itself. We got this 2 lingering outside. Do not distribute this 2. These are not parentheses. They're absolute value. And then you also have this minus 3. So let's move this 3 over first. Okay. So that's going to give me 2 absolute value of 3x minus 1 equals 10. Now we're going to get rid of this 2. This 2 is being multiplied here. You're not subtracting the 2. You're going to divide the 2 over. So you're going to have absolute value of 3x minus 1 is equal to 5. Now I can separate it into 2. 3x minus 1 equals 5. And 3x minus 1 equals -5. Okay? So now what I'm going to have is I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I have 3x equals 6 divide by 3, so x equals 2. That is my first solution. I'm going to add the 1 to the other one. I'm going to have 3x is equal to negative 4. Divide by 3 to both sides, so x is equal to negative 4/3. Okay, so that is my two solutions. This is as hard as it's going to get. You might have a couple fractions in there, but you know how to deal with fractions now. Okay, now let's do one last problem. Let's say, for example, we had absolute value of 7 over 6x minus 1 plus 3 is equal to 1. Okay, so now let's subtract the 3 first because we need to isolate this absolute value. So the first thing that we're going to do is get rid of this this 3. Okay, get rid of this, and we have the absolute value of 7 over 6x minus 1 is equal to negative 2. Immediately here, do not separate it because remember, can an absolute value give you a negative distance? The answer is no. So immediately when you solve for an absolute value and you get a negative answer, this is no solution. Okay, so this one actually has no solution to the problem. You cannot solve it. There's no solution to this. Okay, that's all there is to absolute value equations. We will have one more to do absolute value inequalities.